she mentioned, she sent to many of us something about this to him in my journey with Judaism. The book about the Sabbath had a profound effect on me, to say nothing else of, his life and his involvement in liberation. So we can all join together just to say the blessing for participating in Torah study. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvoto v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Okay. Today you can put up the beginning of Shemot. We begin the book that was originally called Yitziat Mitzrayim, Departure from Egypt. The Greek translation of departure is exodos, which is where we get the word exodus from. But the Hebrew tradition is to name the Parashat by its first significant word, which is why we have Shemot, names. And so it shows that Shemot is a natural continuation from the previous chapter, as it begins with the word and these were just the vav, and these are the names of the sons of Jacob, which we've already learned in Genesis. So we've gotten through in Genesis the conflicts and the struggles of the procreation of the patriarchs, which really was so much of Genesis, and only the men are included when it talks about the households. Only the men are included in the number 70, which is really just a symbolic approximation of the household. But in Shemot, and you can go through and just scroll and see the names, Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Judah, okay? But when we're going to keep going down, we see that, Joseph died and all his brothers and all that generation. And then we're telescoping into what comes next, which is when a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. So in Shemot, we are going to see how the women will rise far above some of the rivalry, like between Leah and Rachel, that we saw in Genesis, and create instead a community which defies Pharaoh and leads to the redemption of the Jewish people. Shemot, I think, is really the crux of the Torah, for within it we go from being that tribe to a band of slaves to a redeemed people in this one short chapter, which we'll only have time to do part of. So the families were getting along well with the Egyptians in Goshen, and then when the Pharaoh, who didn't know Joseph, which we saw in verse 8, he thought the Am B'nai Yisrael, he says, he uses the word, and that's the first time that phrase is used. Am B'nai Yisrael are becoming too many and too mighty. So begins Pharaoh's attempts at genocide. You can see here, let us deal shrewdly with them. He turns to the midwives, Shifra and Puah. They're the only people who are named until Moses receives his name. So that shows us how important Shifra and Puah are. They model for the community that they fear God more than the king of Egypt. They are unified against the oppression, and that's the first act of civil disobedience. They use their intelligence to respond to Pharaoh in a way he could not dispute. He couldn't disagree that the Hebrew women were like beasts who deliver babies before midwives can even arrive at the birth scene. Pharaoh has to turn to all the Egyptians and offer rewards for anyone who reports the birth of a Hebrew child. Despite his attempt to make all Egyptians collaborators, you can see in line 22, when he charges all his people, the women are fruitful and swarm and multiply. And that is an allusion to the creation story and also the promise to Abraham for a great and mighty nation. So the shrewd intentions of Pharaoh to make the Hebrews afflicted, burdened, embittered, forced labor cannot compare with a moral defiance. The midwives are named and the word appears 7 times. This story resonates so much with me because it made me so proud, because I was working in the mid-80s as a midwife in a hospital in Sfat, Israel. And it was kind of when I was really kindling my Jewish spirituality. In part, it was a very secular experience, but it was the beginning of my Jewish spirituality. So this Parashat has always been very, very important to me. And I think Lord Rabbi Sachs points out that the stronger the tyranny got, the more the people grow. So I want to read a poem, which Karen's going to put up. I was looking for a poem. I know that there has been one somewhere. Marge Percy mentioned the words Shifra and the names Shifra and Puach. I couldn't find it, but if anyone can, I'll give you a prize if you can find it within this week of this Parsha. This poem is by a Filipina poet whose name I'm not sure how. It's Alice M. Sun Qua, and I will read it. I just want to say first that there is the French word accoucher, which comes from accoucher, which means to give birth. So an accoucheur is someone who is present at the birth of the obstetrician or the midwife. This is an arcane language I speak, to tell of a journey through dark centimeters, mapping out landmarks of pulsing membranes, articulate the distance of passageways, bony and prominent, deem passenger willful enough to navigate narrowing walls in every conceivable way. I am an accoucheur, a figure as old as the strange words I chant, holding the hands of women keening, singing through their tears. There is timelessness in what I do. To be midwife is to be woman with woman assisting, witness to a daily ritual. It is to stand alone in an inescapable, intangible, interminable landscape. It is to wait until the birth of a song. Thank you. We can leave that up there. And I just want to ask, would anyone like to respond to what you think is, why you think I chose this poem, what you think is so strong about it, how this Filipina woman is writing something that to me so closely connects to the Jewish experience of these midwives and the birth of a redeemed people. Anyone want to share something? Karen, can you unmute anyone who'd like to share?
It seems to me that this is a beautiful metaphor of Exodus, that, you know, and God is the ultimate midwife, and being a midwife is to have total compassion and to bring about a creation. They're co-creators of life, and that's what God is. And that's what the story of the Exodus is.
Yep.
Yay,
Anyone
midwives.
Yes. Anyone else see something specific in this poem or something that really resonated with them?
Well, what resonates with me is the woman-to-woman assistance. The fact that it's sort of generations of women helping each other. It's such a very strong image. And I'm curious what you think about why Pharaoh would kill the boys and allow the women to stay alive. It seems ironic. It seems almost contradictory, because it's the women who carry on, you know, creating the next generation. And one would think that if he was really trying to decimate the Jewish people, he would get rid of the women. So this poem is a symbol of the pride of that capability to generate and to bear, children to bear forth. Wow, that journey through dark centimeters, it's amazing. I'm thinking about how you judge when the baby's head is starting to come out. You see how many centimeters dilated the mother is and the cervix is. So pulsing membranes, it's very much the language of birth here.
Yes. Yeah, I really love the part, that, willful, a passenger willful enough to navigate narrowing walls. Of course, Mitzrayim, the narrow
right,
place,
exactly,
in every conceivable way. I think that is part of what drew me to it. Okay, we can go back to the, thank you. I just thought this was a great poem. We can go back to the verses. You asked a very good question. I think from what I've read, what's said is that Pharaoh so feared that the men would rise up, as the men had the power to become fighters in an army if they were in a war. So he wanted to kill the boy children because they would become the male fighters who might oppose him. Okay, so just going back to Shifra and Puach, there are so many things, there are so many questions about and interpretations in Midrash. Are they Egyptian? Are they Hebrew? How do you interpret that line? How could there be only two midwives? I feel like one interpretation I read was, that they're probably just two representatives of a guild of midwives. But I think what's most important is that, everyone knew, because, Pharaoh, wanted his people to be complicit. So he, told them you have to kill any, if you see a Hebrew child, you have to kill it. That yet, despite the decree of the king, all the women were all birthing, whether they were Egyptian or, all the Hebrew women, and they knew, they knew that midwives were not going to kill their sons. So it created an atmosphere of trust. And I realized that if this, I said this, if this isn't successful grassroots organizing and community building, then what is? And of course, the daughter of Pharaoh is completely complicit, to the point of, if we go to, chapter 2, verses 9, 10, we see that, again, we all know the story and we talk about it as Miriam and Yocheved and all that. But in fact, none of those women are named. None of those women are named. We simply we know, as the way things develop, that that's who it is. But none of them are named. It is only Shifra and Puach who are named. There are lots of theories. Why did the Egyptian princess go to the river that day? But the point is that she offered to pay a slave wages to nurse a child for her. She didn't need to do that. The mother of the child would have gladly just taken the child back to nurse. But this shows her compassion and her support of this community of women, which I think is amazing. Then we get to chapter 2, verses 10 to 12. And I'm amazed at how little is said about, I'm sorry, you can go back to 9 and you just see in 9, Pharaoh's daughter said, take the child, nurse it. So the woman took the child and nursed. And then the child, verse 10, grew up. She brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, who made him her son. Apparently in Egypt, women had more rights. She didn't feel she had to ask her father, the king, for permission. She just named him Moses, explaining, I drew him out of the water. That's verse 10. And then 11, soon after that, when he'd grown up, he went out to his kinsfolk and witnessed their labors and saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his kinsmen. So we don't know. I just want to ask, because many people here are much more educated than I am. Why do you think in 2 lines, and then 12 is, he strikes one down and hit him. So in 2 lines, it goes from Moses is a baby given to the princess to his growing up. And we know nothing about his education. What do people think? What do people think? Why is there this incredibly fast change from one verse to the next of him being, suckled and brought back to the princess to now going out and witnessing his brethren? What do you think happened in the interim? Anyone have any ideas? Have you noticed how quickly in the past, have you read this and wondered, how did this happen so fast? Anyone have any thoughts on that?
It's always been puzzling to me that there's nothing said. And what also puzzles me is it's very unclear how old Moses is when he's brought back to Pharaoh's daughter. It says it's the same verb, when he had grown.
Right.
So I have wondered, since he's being taken care of by his mother with his sister, is that how he knows who his kinfolk are? What have they said to him? How old is he? Because we simply don't know. He may well have been, he may have been 5. I have no idea. And it's just not given to us, because that's the next puzzling statement. He went out to his kinfolk and witnessed their labors.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. So we have no idea who's been informing him of what.
Exactly. And that I just find that fascinating, about, how could we imagine, what his life was like, and how did he know these were his brethren? And so I'm going to stop here, because of course the real important things about Moses and seeing the bush not consumed is such an important part of this parsha. But I really just wanted to focus on what I think is the crux of bringing the role of women now into the Torah. They're not yet named. The next person who's named is Zipporah, when Moses flees to Midian, and you see the repetition of he waters the flocks, and the father of Zipporah says, you can have my daughter as a wife, and he ends up staying there. And it's what has happened to so many other couples previously in Genesis, the watering at the well, and then you have a couple and they procreate. And then things, get more exciting for Moses. But I think that this emphasis that here we have so much going on, a king attempting genocide and women supporting each other to fight this genocide, this oppression. So I just want to give us all a blessing based on this, that we can follow the values of Judaism and help transform a world which is often based on exploitation to one that has a foundation with spiritual and moral values and empathy and compassion, as these midwives did. Thank you.